Okay, so I think what we'll do is maybe just ask the panel to introduce themselves. And Chris, if we could start with you, and then let's move down this way towards Lorraine.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Campbell. I am the CEO of an organization called Consulting Engineers South Africa.
Great, thanks very much.
My name is Heather Dodd. I'm representing the South African Institute of Architects, and I'm an architect in practice in Johannesburg.
Thanks, Heather.
Morning, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Wapnick. I'm the CEO of City Property, a business that operates mainly in the Gauteng area. As far as residential is concerned, we probably manage approximately 14,000 residential units.
Right, and then Lorraine, if you could tell us a little bit about you and your career.
You said we had a minute.
Well, it's giving you a bit more time.
When you get to my age, you've got lots to tell. My name is Lorraine Jenks. I'm a specialist in climate change, sustainability, circularity, regeneration, ESG, AI, with a special interest in interiors. I worked for Southern Sun for 15 years as a procurement manager. This was one of our first green projects, was the convention center, Palazzo Hotel, Intercontinental Hotel, and it became, after having been a hippie in California in 1970, when marijuana was illegal, and I worked for Deloitte, and we were stoned every morning. Even the partners were stoned, like far out, like, wow, man. And the Environmental Protection Agency was brand new, and I came home with all that knowledge, and of course South Africa was way behind. So for this, I did the operating equipment and furniture and fittings for the convention center, for example, and just to give you an idea, I'm talking, 24 years ago. All the tables are locally made with sustainable products in a very well-run factory. The carpeting is synthetic. So we wouldn't normally call that sustainable or green. So try and think for a moment why this modular carpeting was chosen as a better product for sustainability. And then the rest is history. I'll tell you later.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So I thought just to introduce the discussion and the thought process before I turn to the panelists, is a question that you could ask yourself is, are you prepared to give up some of your profits? Maybe some of the returns that you would earn on your retirement so that we can have a better future going forward? Is that something you're prepared to do? I think it's a hard ask. So the question, in context of what we're going to discuss now, which talks about the future and some requirements that we want to apply in this sector, is where are you going to sleep tonight? I remember going down London Road in winter on my way to the airport. I go down that way because sometimes Marlborough is a little bit busy. And there was a guy crawling into a box. That was his house. And I thought about that. I thought, to give context, I'm driving in my nice air-conditioned car, getting onto an air-conditioned plane, and going to be sleeping in a very comfortable, warm hotel room that night. How immediate are their needs? And when we talk about the issues we're going to talk about now, maybe keep that in the back of your minds as a balance to the discussion and the questions that you may raise. Please remember to text through your questions on the WhatsApp group. So bear in mind that all of us sitting up here, we value this planet that we live on. But I think as part of the debate, it's important to ask these sorts of questions as well. Lorraine, I'd like to start with you, and maybe if you could give us a typical walkthrough a home and illustrate, particularly on the inside, the kinds of sustainability options that one would look at and the kind of decor that one would consider when we're looking at this topic of transformation through innovation, technology, and sustainable living.
You're talking to me.
Lorraine.
Lorraine.
Me.
Yeah.
I think we must make it simple. Everyone's making everything so terribly complicated, like ESG. If we just understand the fundamental principles, I'm actually finding now, I'm asked to speak to the big top decision makers in corporations, because they have never actually thought about the environment or biodiversity. They are there to make money. That's why they are where they are, and I wish I had a bit of their talent. I have to go in and speak about the fundamental principles of climate change and what we call ecocide, which is eco means life and side means to kill. And to stop and think with every purchase that you ever make. So for example, if I walked into a hotel or into your home, let's say we go into the lobby of the hotel, the first thing we do is stand back and say, the next time you do a refurb or you need to buy or replace something or it's a new build, maybe there's a better option of what you've got. So we look at the paint, for example. Is it VOC free? Is it off-gassing toxic chemicals? Look at the flooring. You can have bamboo, cork, rubber, FSC certified wood, sisal, jute. There are so many alternatives, so you don't have to have a synthetic carpet. Always imagine where that thing is going to end up. Look at your back of house. Was all your equipment environmentally friendly and energy efficient? And then go into the bedroom, for example, of your home. What is your mattress made of? I cannot find a green mattress in South Africa. There's only the Hastings mattress, which costs a fortune, which is only natural products with a lifetime guarantee. Your bed linen should not be polyester, should not even be a cotton polyester mix, because cotton is very seldom organic. It should be things like flax. Flax will outlast cotton. It should be hemp. Hemp's very hard when you first buy it, but the more you wash it, the softer it gets. And in Italy, in antique shops, you can buy second, third, fourth hand bed linen. It gets so beautifully silky as it gets older. You go into your bathroom. Have you got low flow shower rows, for example? Dual flush toilets, so you're using less water. What are your toiletries and your cosmetics? Did you know that a lot of your cosmetics have not been tested since 1938? Did you know that? Here and in America. In Europe, they are very, very strict with testing ingredients of products. Go into your kitchen. Are your appliances energy efficient, water efficient? Gas is better than electricity, but still not the best option. Induction is the best option. Look at your woodwork. Is it all FSC certified? Look at all your ingredients. Are they organic, local, heritage, indigenous foods wherever possible? Start cooking millet and sorghum, because maize is not going to survive climate change. And then go right through to the back of your house. Is your garden water conserving water? Is your pool being cleaned with something like salt or other, so many options you've got now rather than chlorine? So every single step of the way, just stand back and think, is there a better way? And I can guarantee you there is probably a better choice. And no one's delinquent or irresponsible. People just haven't thought about it and haven't been advised. So when you leave here, you'll have a whole new way of thinking. I've got a friend who got out of his shower and he phoned me after. He says, I absolutely hate you. I stepped out of my shower and I thought, oh my God, I wonder what this carpet's made of, and I wonder what Lorraine would say about my soap. So that's about it.
Great. Thanks, Lorraine. Appreciate that. And I think that takes us into the next topic, maybe to you, Chris. From an engineering point of view, the alternative technologies that you're seeing being introduced into South Africa and your membership, their desire to use these sorts of products. First of all, are you seeing that coming through in the construction world? And secondly, do you think it's appropriate for our conditions here in South Africa?
Marius, I have to be careful when I answer that, because my organization has as many as up to 600 member companies with diverse and divergent opinions on these. So I think generally what we do find is that there's an appetite for innovation on the part of the design team. The constraints are with our regulators. And what unfortunately has happened in our system, along with the notion that you could outsource public services, our standards bureau itself had come apart in the same, in the same manner. And it's a hard ask trying to get particular standards through our previously really functional and now known as SANS. So whereas the appetite's there, the knowledge on the technology that's available is there, and the awareness of how we are facing really different climatic patterns. The ability for the design team to simply go ahead and say, well, this is what's going to be used and so on, is not always readily accepted. In public sector developments, all the more so. Private sector developments, I guess the appetite for uptake is greater, except I think the challenge comes down to, if I'm the private sector developer and I implement newer technologies that are energy efficient and all of the above, am I really interested in spending all that money up front? Because I want to sell it. That's the future owner's problem. And I think that short-sightedness sometimes does limit the ability to implement these newer systems in water usage, in power consumption.
Yes.
So certainly I would say that it's not impossible. We do need to start thinking about it. I think a lot of us, just in the past few days, is a stark reminder in Johannesburg of how ill-equipped our houses are for cold climate. The glazing that we use, the internal insulation, the roofing, all of that, none of those are standard. So we may need to start thinking of how do we equip, retrofit even some of our dwellings, so that people are less inclined to have to turn on 5 heaters at a time to keep the house warm, and just as one example. Okay. Some of the challenges that we do face are probably only going to be addressed and possible to address in the future is why we still, in our households at the moment, flush our toilets with drinking water, with potable water. So that's the legacy conservatism in our systems. We might never have considered that actually you don't need drinkable water to flush your toilets with, and we should have a dual pipe system.
Yeah.
But you can't have that. To retrofit it just costs way too much. We have hard enough time keeping our existing infrastructure functional. So I think many of us, again, in and around Johannesburg, no water yesterday, tomorrow, and we have entities responsible for providing that continuity, trying to play catch-up 7 years later. So we are on the back foot. And whereas we should be looking into the future and the future technologies, we have this conundrum that we better start looking after what we have first. There's no point in us trying to fly when we're not even crawling properly.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate those comments. And maybe, Heather, to ask you a question, the focus is often on the bricks and mortar, but there's other components to sustainable living and ESG in its greatest sense as well, in terms of integrating into communities and spatial design, and how we would use that as a means to creating sustainable communities. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, so I think at the bottom line of what everybody's saying is we want to live in healthy spaces. And the other point is that I think was brought up yesterday is innovation, and where are our competitive advantages in the kinds of developments and housing that people are providing. So, a lot of the discussions, if you look at the topics, are about the materiality, the services, and all of those kinds of things. But I'd like to also put a spin on what does that mean in terms of the spaces we live in? We've seen so many changes in the way people live. How are the spaces that we build reflecting that? For example, touched on slightly this morning was multi-family or people sharing spaces. Those kinds of things, in fact, are the norms in places like Johannesburg. People don't necessarily live in their own homes. How do we facilitate that? How do we think about how that could be integrated into the kinds of developments that we do? So I'm saying that, innovation is almost always bracketed in terms of materials. It's an amazing system or a new material that we can use. But what about how does that impact on, how do we think about space innovatively? Maybe that's also a point where innovation has to happen.
Great, appreciate those comments. I think the 3 points that we've touched on, or the 3 comments that we've heard, talks about the bricks and mortar and how we improve that. Maybe a question to you, Jeff. So Jeff's a very practical guy, a little bit of a history on them in terms of repurposing buildings and conversions of offices to residential. Their company was probably the first institutional entity that did that. And I think must have been an opportunity that you saw in terms of this great need that we have. So we've heard figures between 2.1 million and 3.5 million households requiring housing in our country, equating to about 12 million people. So that's a significant portion of our population. Do you think the requirements of sustainability, of ESG, should that be applicable to all sectors of housing and all categories of housing in South Africa?
Well, thank you. With ladies like this, it's very difficult for me to say ESG is not applicable. But I actually think it is. I want to, if I may, reflect back on yesterday's discussion, specifically 2 presentations. The first presentation was from John Lewis, the economist from FNB, where he spoke about the importance of the private sector taking control of the bigger problems, with government on the side just providing the necessary regulatory processes that gave us an element of control and secondly, I want to reflect also, if we may, on the panel that spoke about residential accommodation. And for me, what was so pleasing to hear is that residential accommodation works. You had the one lady, Alona, speaking about from MSCI, I think it's called, about how the residential market was, from a financial point of view, outperforming many of the other sectors within the property sector, which our own experiences are also proving to be correct. And secondly, she anticipated a growth in the residential sector. So my comment is that we need to embrace somehow a lot more of residential accommodation driven by the private sector in collaboration perhaps with government. I know that there's enough talent, I don't know whether they're all here, but sitting in the room yesterday, that within a few months we could develop or start developing, certainly getting involved in the initial development stage for a good few thousand units, which in turn would provide accommodation for a lot of people. Currently, I don't see the country moving forward to eliminating some of that huge accommodation backlog. And I think that something could be created, perhaps a national, some form of national financing scheme that would encourage those people that were highly skilled in developing residential accommodation. And in that process, perhaps some of the other areas that required attention, such as ESG, such as transformation, such as the elimination of the chronic under provision of accommodation. Yes, so to answer you, it's a long way for me to say, I think that if this could be formalized and recognized that residential market should play a far bigger role within the economy than currently is the case, a lot of other issues could be resolved quite easily.
Thanks, Jeff. Heather, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to the point of building transformation, which is what Jeff and I and many other people have been doing for a lot of years, is let's take a building. I mean, the fact that it is already, we have an embedded carbon footprint is fantastic. There's things that we can improve on a lot in the buildings that we do in terms of energy and water efficiency. But let's just talk about the space that we create in the buildings. I mean, we've done some buildings where we're trying to look at alternative patterns or spaces that people want. People yesterday responded to the fact that maybe you don't want to own a house because you own a house somewhere else, but you want somewhere in the city. So, when at the end of apartheid, we thought rooms would go. Rooms on roofs, gone. In fact, they're very, very sought after. So we've been looking at how do we actually transform buildings and create all kinds of different spaces for people to live in, from self-contained apartments to maybe rooms where people share amenities, to maybe groups of shared where you can have almost 6 people sharing an apartment, or a very large family if a person wanted to do that. We've also been looking at places in the suburban areas where suddenly you find out that Elovo actually has a lower square meter rate than the center of town for an apartment, because apartments are so big. So, what do you do with those apartments? You can, transform them. And what about the rooms on the roof? 6 square meter rooms on the roof, they still exist. Amazing views over the entire city. Inclusionary housing has been one of the ways that we've been looking at incorporating them back into the building and creating different kinds of spaces, smaller units for people that can live in a really great area. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of innovation in spatial transformation. And I think that then links to the back into the whole ESG debate. I think where we fail is the fact that all of this housing is being developed without any input from the city in terms of urban transformation and urban support. So, if you look at this inner city of Johannesburg, we've probably got about 40, 50, I don't even know how many thousands of redeveloped buildings without one new public school, one, very few urban spaces. Right. So we're not creating healthy environments for people to live in. When they walk to a nice building, that's not a very nice experience.
Experience for them. So just, Chris, did you want to add something? I wanted to ask Lorraine a question, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'd like to weigh in on that. I think, and we're talking, if we talk about densification, what we need to also start thinking of is, does our bulk infrastructure systems, will they be able to cope with that? And maybe we need to take a step back and look at how might we innovate in the densification. Your stormwater from rain can't just go down into the stormwater system. The piping system can't handle. I think part of what we've seen as a consequence in KZN with floods was a poor management of water, stormwater that needed to go somewhere. And the more you develop, the more that water's got to go away. It's not going to filter into the ground. So in your densified developments, how might you harvest that rainwater? How might you use your roof space for solar? And because then you mitigate the demand on your bulk systems for stormwater discharge or electrical supply, just as 2 examples.
Okay.
So it needs to be holistic, and I think far too often People assume that once I've done this, my job's done. Everything else that needs to come in will come from elsewhere, and everything that needs to go will go off there. But if there are constraints, then you are going to have problems after the fact.
Thanks for that, Chris. Just, Lorraine, before we get to you, just want to share a statistic with you. 39% of global energy-related carbon emissions come from buildings. 28% from the operation of those buildings, and 11% from the materials and the construction process. If you were to advise developers as to the one thing that they can do to lessen their carbon footprint, what advice would you give?
Sure. You know, it's about more than the carbon footprint. Everything is carbon footprint. Greenhouse gases. When I give a talk on climate change, I've hardly heard the word climate change said once at this conference. You cannot talk about climate change unless you also talk about the destruction of biodiversity. So every single decision we make every day, every single thing we buy impacts on both of those. And for you know, I'm not an architect, but they have got some pretty innovative ideas now on reducing the carbon footprint wherever they can. But that's for green building is really understood and being applied now. People are doing it properly, but they're still not looking at the interiors. Everything in this room has scope 1, 2, and 3 levels of a carbon footprint. We need to know what they are. That's where ESG comes in, and we will be astonished if you look at the tablecloths, the bottles of water, the crockery, the cutlery, the food in the kitchen, the carpets, the decor, every single, where are those tablecloths going to end up? They're synthetic. They're going to end up in landfill. There's nothing you can do with them. So we have to think about everything that we use every day, and then first look at the energy consumption, then look at the water conservation, and then look where is it going to end up. Where it ends up, to me, sometimes is even more serious than that. Recycling is a complete hoax of plastics, absolute rubbish. It's insulting our intelligence. I mean, wood and steel and glass, those are imminently recyclable over and over again, but not plastic. So stand back when you buy something and think of its entire life cycle, where it comes from. I'll go through that later on in detail if you want. And then decide of 1, 2, 3 products, which of those is the safest, the best, and the most responsible. And anyone who's done training in procurement and supply chain, they give us beautiful templates to choose, because it's hard to know what products to choose unless you go into Google and study over and over and over again. Wonderful way to choose a husband, some of them, by the way. Okay. Now I've lost my train of thought.
Well, that's fine. I think I want to move on to another question, and maybe you can put your comments.
I've got one more thing to say.
Okay, go ahead.
Quickly before I forget.
argue with you.
What I did for that, because when I worked for Southern Sun, I was with them for 15 years, nagging for them to buy a greener option of things. We did a hotel with teak. I said, where does the teak come from? No, we don't know. So I said, I promise you it comes from Zimbabwe, and it's illegally logged. And it's a slow glowing tree. And they used to pat me on the head and say, little green queen, you worried about the bunnies? So I walked out. After 15 years, I walked out. And what I did, my son was still at school, and he said, why don't you put everything you know onto the internet? And I said, what's the internet? It was brand new. So he listed all the people I dealt with at Southern Sun, all the suppliers. Then I already knew who had a green product. So hotel stuff is my main directory. It's completely free to use, non-profit. It's like a Yellow Pages. It's got a sister website called Green Stuff. People don't know where to find the stuff. So anyone who's got a green product is put onto Green Stuff, free of charge again, free to use. One of the only such things in the world. Started for hotels now, absolutely used by everybody. Architects use it, governments. So Green Stuff, go and look it up. Right. And if you know anything, let's put it on there. And then people, make it easy. We've got to make it simple and easy for people to make decisions.
Thanks, Lorraine. Appreciate that. Try and incorporate the comments you want to make, but the question just on the comment Lorraine made about plastic being a hoax. What's your thought on carbon credits? I'm trying to get this market working in my mind to understand how that works, because someone in Europe is burning carbon and doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and so they pay some guy in a poor African country to take the rap for their guilt. Okay, that's like me sending someone off on a date with my wife so I can go fishing, right? Just comments on that, because I suppose your clients, both as engineers and architects, they're the ones creating those credits, or they're utilizing them in their designs.
Do you want to use this for you to answer?
There we go. So, yeah, Marius, thanks. I think, I think the penny should have dropped by now. Probably, well over 20 years ago, I read a book called Filters Against Folly. And it was exactly around the temperature rise patterns as a result of the carbon emissions, measuring right down to the amounts of methane produced by cows, the beef that we eat, and how that was leading to global warming, etc. Right. And there were a lot of denialists. I think we may still find quite a few denialists, but right now, I think the reality is best we do something, because, it may be a just in case. It's a bit like insurance, but there's enough evidence of the trajectory. Now, I want to be opportunistic and link that to our procurement process, because unless you, in your developmental process, put some innovation in the procurement, you're going to end up with, the bad end result. And what I'd like to maybe raise is the issue of how counterintuitively many client bodies, as developers, government, assume that your built environment professional team, your engineers, your architects, and so on, you procure their services at least cost, you ask for a discount, but you want this great innovation that helps you tick the ESG boxes and all of the above. It's counterintuitive. The reality for most people to be aware of is that if you take any development, you're talking about a life cycle of at least 30, 40 years, if not more, if it's well maintained. The first 5 years may be your design team. It's 2% of the entire cost of the life cycle of your ownership of that. 2%. The other 10% is in your construction phase, and it comes through the materials. The remaining 88% is in your operation and maintenance. Now, how is it that we continue to try and push your built environment design team to provide that innovation, help you tick these boxes, but you want to pay them, bottom dollar? I mean, it's tantamount to going to your heart surgeon and saying, I need heart surgery, can you give me a discount?
I've got you. Heather, I see you nodding. You want to comment on that? Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have so many clients that there's often a separation between the people in a company that are doing the development, so the development team, and the management team. And the development team, and they have two different goals. So the development team is there to produce this development at the kind of the most feasible, lowest cost, best return, let's say, scenario. The management team is there to manage the building, and they've got a longer term view. They've got to manage it over 20 years. But the person, so as the professional, the right thing to procure is something that's going to last. And especially if we want to do these, we want to think about life cycle, we think all of these kinds of things. So, the toilet seat or tap is a big option. The person wants the cheapest tap. It's going to cost more for the management team to come and replace a tap in calling the plumber out in 6 months' time after we've handed over the project. So these are the dichotomies that we have to resolve in the procurement process. Things like people come and say, we want to comply with low flow water taps.
Yeah.
Fantastic. But but the specification must be Cobra individual taps. You say, well, they're not low flow.
Yeah.
So what do you want? How are we going to resolve the situation? So those are the kinds of things that every decision has an impact. So to come back to what Lorraine is saying, I think we have to consider every decision. In every procurement decision, everything that you go into the building has to be considered properly. And then if you think about the slide that was shown in the first lecture, I mean, all these products that come from all over the place.
Right.
I mean, you have no idea what the footprint of a product actually is. It's almost unknown when you see the complexity of global procurement. So, I mean, I think what we have to do is we have to consider everything that we do has to, I mean, the word consider has to be thought through very carefully because we want to put something into a building that's going to last. And that comes back to, we have to put time in thinking, and our industry is all about speed. Quick, fast, get it done, big return, best return. But we have to put all of these things together, and it's complex.
So, thanks for that. And maybe a question to you then, Jeff, is, money flows where there's a return. And if we're going to make any impact or dent into the housing shortfall that we have to make it attractive enough for capital to flow there. So that's the one point. The second point is, we have these ideals of what we want to deliver, but the biggest fun time activity in the country at the moment is service delivery boycotts, because the water's not working, the sewer is causing cholera, and. How do we solve the housing crisis? And given these challenges that we face, and bearing in mind that any investor has the opportunity to do asset allocation, not only within sectors within South Africa, but geographically all over the world as well. How do we solve the problem?
Well, whereas I'm sticking to my guns, I still think that the residential market the residential rental option does provide a lot of solutions. I think it ticks a number of boxes. The one that I didn't mention was finance. I think for those bankers that are here, it could be easier for a banker to give a loan to a developer with trusted set of skills as opposed to spreading those allocated funds to individual buyers. I think that's the harsh reality of the world we live in. But I think if it's properly managed, I do think, and we were given time to come up with the right product, given what we're talking about at this entire conference, I think, and the cash hadn't yet started flowing, but we had spent time developing. I think one could come up with a better product. I support your contention that and I know what happens out there. I'm part of it. The proper people around the table. So you had those that are developers that were driving yield, that were keeping our costs as low as possible, versus the property managers that get handed that product, and within 6 months the bloody tap is leaking because we hadn't chosen the right tap. I think that something could be done within the industry to force us to start thinking like that. Maybe the answer, if there are any government officials out there, is a bit of soft money, a bit of collaboration with the councils to give us rates, rebates. There are ideas that will help developers slow things down and come up with a better product. I'm old in the industry, but I can tell you at the time when interest rates spiked. The development that continued in that time or started in that time was that's when the real rush came, and there was a term, let's fast track this product and this building, and there was no time allocated to sensible thinking like you're thinking, and I think that the industry hasn't lost that. You meet an architect, it's go instead of just slowing down and doing things properly.
Thanks for that. Sorry, Heather, I've been given the evil eye from that side. Just a closing comment from my end. I think this conference has been fantastic that we've been able to get together and share thoughts and ideas. I think the important bit that needs to flow from here is to have a forum where we can have a discussion between the important parties, because we've seen other organizations that consist of the membership, the developers, property owners, whoever it may be, and all we see is there's a lot of legal activity and legal battles that seems to be ongoing. If you look at the NEDLAC model, you've got the employers, you've got government, and you've got the employees sitting around the same table. And maybe it's time for us to think about that, other than just getting together as an industry, to be able to sit around the table with the likes of the banks and government. Government's role is that of a facilitator. We sit there as implementers, but we need someone who's going to enable us to do that. And I think that's the banking system. I've made myself available to say, I'm ready to be part of that process and put that challenge out to a few organizations out there. Hopefully, as an industry, we'll be able to take up that challenge, and there are so many issues that we need to address, some of it being what we discussed here today. So I would ask you to reflect on that, and so that we're not back here in a year's time talking about the challenges, but more about the solutions that we're implementing. Thank you very much.